right. Welcome, everybody. Like Charlie said, we are going to talk about writing UC Secondaries today. And um, I do want to say that this is majority medical school. I was planning on doing allopathic med schools for UC, so I apologize if there are any pre-vets or pre-dental here. I did not include those. This is allopathic UC schools. So, this will take the full hour. It would probably take a lot longer if I were to go through every UC health profession program, but we will do the best we can. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different UCs as we go through them, so that if you are part of a different health profession, keep this information in mind as you're thinking about their secondaries, because where they are in the state, it does matter. There are different, they're serving different populations, they're serving different regions, and they have different goals. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to close this down. Let's get started. So we'll start with, of course, the most important UC of all of them, I'm sure, UC Riverside. And so I also want to state that these are the prompts that were used for the 2021-22 cycle. We don't have any way of knowing what the 22-23 prompts are going to be yet, because they haven't sent any out yet. Today was just the first day that allopathic med schools received applications from AMCAS, so we won't know what the UC secondaries are for a few more days. But this is what they used last year, and they tend to stay pretty similar from year to year. Sometimes they'll change character count, they may change one or two questions, but again, I think the experience of going through some of these questions and talking about how to approach the questions in general will also be useful for other schools. So let's look at each secondary, and I want you all to ask questions, unmute yourself, raise your hand, however you'd like to do it. But if you are unsure about how to approach any of the secondaries as we go through each school, please ask as we're going through. So you're going to see questions a lot that start with the mission, and schools are very interested in finding the right, the quote fit for this school. Now, if you go to every school's mission statement, you're going to be disappointed, because most of the mission statements at schools are very, very similar. And so mission statements alone don't really tell you a lot when it comes to how you specifically fit into that school. So even though it says the mission, I want you all to remember what we talked about before when we talked about picking your schools. You really have to go beyond the mission statement, and you really need to dig deeper into the website and find not just what they're saying they're doing on their mission statement, but what are they actually doing? How do their actions demonstrate what they care about? So in this case, they're saying UCR is striving to train a diverse physician workforce to meet the needs of underserved communities in the inland Southern California. What experiences, skills, and abilities will you bring to the class to fulfill this mission? So this is basically, what is the value that you bring to us? What can you do for us that will help us do what we do? So what do we have to know first in order to answer this question? Well, we have to know a couple things, right? We have to know what we did, which you already know. You know what you did, and you know what skills you have, and you know what abilities you have. But we also have to know, what are they doing specifically? So we know they're meeting the needs of the community, but how are they doing that? And so when you go back and you look at your experiences, I would think about, you guys have the huge advantage with Riverside, of course, because you have already served that community. Now, I know that it's a little tough because they take a lot of people into their class through the early assurance program, and so that limits the number of people they're going to take outside of that, and that's true for all the UCs. Like UC Davis only took a certain number of UC Davis students. Going to a particular school does not guarantee you're going to get into that school, so of course you're going to apply broadly, but you already have insight into what UCR is doing in that area. So you just take what you did and you think about, how can I bring value to the school? How can I bring value in terms of my lived experiences, the things I've done? It's not enough just to list what you did. You actually have to take it to the next level and tell them how what you did is going to bring some specific value. So if all you do in your answers is just regurgitate your experience description, that's not going to be enough, because they already know what you did, right? They can read that. All right, the values of the UCR School of Medicine are integrity, innovation, inclusion, excellence, accountability, and respect. Choose one of these values and tell us about a time when you demonstrated it. So, you know those stories that you wrote for your personal statement that you didn't get to use because you only had 5,300 characters? Well, this is the time you get to go back to all that extra writing you had and you get to sift through all of that and you get to pull out one of the stories that you had from one of your many experiences that you really, really wanted to tell them. And then you think about that story through the lens of one of these attributes. And then you retell the story through showing how you demonstrated inclusion or how you demonstrated respect. It doesn't matter which one. You're going to just pick a really cool story that shows something about you, one of those things. Now, in telling a story about, let's say, inclusion, you get to reveal a lot more about you, right? It's not simply about inclusion. So if there are other things about you that you feel like you didn't get to really dive in deep in your application, this is a great time to showcase some of those other things that you really, really feel are important about you. So, for example, I'll give you an example for inclusion. I read a lot of stories where people, at some point in their life, they felt othered in some way, whether it was in high school or just, throughout their lives, whether it was from being an immigrant, from being part of the LGBTQ community to having an interesting name, like whatever it is, like somehow, some way they felt othered. And so they tell a story about feeling othered, that moment in time, how that happened, what that looked like. And then they talk about how that othering that occurred to them led them to be more compassionate, that makes them a little bit more sensitive to the suffering of others when it comes to feeling included. And so that story that you choose to tell, it reveals another aspect of you. You get to share some other thing that they might already know, but you don't get to really talk about. You could do that with excellence, with research experience, accountability with a failure if you messed up somehow. All med schools love a good failure story. So it really doesn't matter, but here's your chance to say something else. All right, third one. In what medical specialty are you interested? What experiences have created the foundation for this interest? Now, this is so funny to me because so many pre-meds love to tell me how you are not supposed to pick your specialty already. I can't tell you how many times I get told this from people. And I'm always thinking, well, if that's true, then why are they asking you this question? It's not just UCR that asks this question. There are other medical schools across the country that ask you this. If that's the case, why are they asking this? And you might be thinking in your head, well, they just want to know if I want to do primary care because they're looking for PCPs. It could be true. I mean, they are looking for primary care physicians because there's a shortage in the country. But at the same time, there are also a shortage of specialists in underserved areas. I mean, don't underserved communities also need surgeons? Don't they also need dermatologists? I mean, physicians are needed everywhere and all specialties are needed everywhere. I mean, it depends on supply and demand, but it doesn't matter what you want to be. If you say that you want to be a surgeon, you have to, I would argue that if you're going to put that on paper, you want to go into this answer sort of thinking about how competitive something like surgery or plastics or dermatology, neurosurgery, something like that, you want to think about, okay, that's a really competitive field. What have I done in my life to prepare myself to enter such a competitive realm? And you might say, I already have, right? Like, I have already mastered my study skills. I'm really, really good at taking very difficult tests. I have already been engaged in research. I've already done some work in that area. I've already shadowed people, and I've already sort of really solidified that desire. And I understand through and through what are the pros and cons of that specialty. And if you've done all the work that would basically actually make you a very competitive person in that field, then it would be perfectly fine to say that that's what you're interested in and then showcase how you understand you're going to get to that point. So I hope you all, I'm going to quickly tell you what you're going to do when you get to school. Whatever specialty you end up wanting to go into, if it's something besides primary care, you're going to need to start to do activities in that area very early in your career. So as soon as you get to med school, you're going to start shadowing doctors just to figure out what you want to do. You're going to start joining interest groups. You're going to get put in research. You're going to need to do things from the very beginning to prep yourself for residency. So the sooner you know what you want to do in med school, the better it is. because they know that the longer you do things in that specialty, the more competitive you become for residency. So that's why they're asking you this question. They want to know, like, where are you on that spectrum? So let's say you have a really strong interest, but you are in the camp where you're not supposed to say what you really want to do in life, and you just water this down and say, oh, I'm still exploring, I have an open mind. You might think, well, I'm doing the right thing, but what if 6,000 applicants said that? What if all 6,000 people said, oh, I'm just exploring, I have an open mind? Well, if that's true, then why the heck would they ask the question if that's what they're expecting of you? Why would they want to read 6,000 times that you have an open mind and you're just exploring? Like, there would be no point to this question. So if you have an idea, don't be afraid to share it. As long as you're realistic about what you're doing and you sound mature and thoughtful, you can literally say whatever you want to do. I would encourage you not to, say, I want to be a surgeon and I want to open up a free clinic in an underserved area and I want to do global health and I want to do research. Because once you start listing all those things, then it becomes a little unrealistic in terms of how you're going to accomplish all of that. Okay, tell us about a personal challenge you have faced in your life so far, and how have you demonstrated resilience and grit to get over it. Personal challenge is literally anything. It could be as kind of simple as, like, I had something in my home life, like my parents were struggling with substance abuse disorders, or it could be I myself faced anxiety or depression, or it could be I had an eating disorder, or it could be I came to college and was very well not prepared for college based on my high school education. Literally any challenge. I would not talk about like something that happened in a club in college. I wouldn't talk about an activity challenge because that's not really a personal challenge. I think this is more thinking about something that has almost like a disadvantage statement, something that has really caused you some concern. And then you want to show not just what that was, all the characters can't be devoted to that, but you really need to spend about half of the time talking about how you overcame that. So any questions about UCR? Okay.
I have questions. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's for the first question, regarding like experience, skill, and ability. Um, so we can talk about things that we for example, if we volunteer a lot in the hospital, those kind of things, can we use that to talk about in this case? Because I know that a lot of pre-med students also do the same thing, so I'm worried that if I talk about it, it's kind of like everyone talk about it. So
Well, it's not enough just to say I did community service in the hospital because they already know that, right? Like they can read your experience description page and they already know that you did that. So that's not new or interesting information. So I would take it one step further. Having done the community service in the hospital, what did you take away from that brings some value to them? So what did you learn from that experience that directly applies to what UCR is doing? Like, did you notice that certain community members in the hospital were treated differently? Did you notice any bias in healthcare? Did you notice how there was still some challenges in certain areas of healthcare that need to be addressed? Did you notice that people who couldn't afford the healthcare were turned away or walked away from services? Did you notice that certain communities declined joining clinical trials more often? I mean, there's a lot of problems in healthcare. If you noticed any of them, you could pick one and just talk about having come to that understanding, and that's something that you hope to bring to the school, is that understanding and that perspective and wanting to do something about it.
okay, thank you.
And it would be great if you found something at UCR that, like a faculty member who's doing research in that area or a club that works in that, and you say, I want to join the blah 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 club where I hope to increase access for those experiencing homelessness, because I know that this is still a very prevalent issue in the Inland Empire.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. So UC Irvine, what personal accomplishment are you most proud of? The word here is personal, right? So what other kind of accomplishment could there be? I think it's interesting that they use the word personal. I think personal to me feels like something that is not just your job. Um, I know that if someone asked me that question, it would be easy for me to start immediately listing, oh, I became this and I did this and I did this. But to me, that doesn't feel personal. Personal would be like, I ran a marathon, which is not true. I overcame one of my, personal challenges. Maybe a personal accomplishment was training my dog, or learning the piano, or learning a second language, or building something in the community that meant something to me. Maybe it's still like something I did, but I did it for a very personal reason. A personal accomplishment would not be I got 1,000 hours of shadowing experience, right? Um, so I would think about that, and anytime you read a secondary, you really want to look at the words that they're asking or words that they're using, and think about why did they phrase that question that way? Because they could choose any word, right? They literally created these secondaries from scratch, so they were very deliberate about their word choices. If you see a word and it's standing out to you, you should pay attention to it because it's not there by accident. So please describe to the admissions committee a challenge or disappointment you have overcome and what you learned about yourself from that experience. So a challenge or disappointment. Um, Again, it could be anything. It could be personal. It could be in the research lab. It could be realizing something big about society. It could be, you can keep it really simple and basic, or you can make it really profound. And what did you learn about yourself? It's not about what you learned about wanting to become a doctor. Like, please, please, please don't say, oh, well, this experience taught me that I really, really want to be going to medicine. Again, they already know that you want to go into medicine because you applied and you took the MCAT, and nobody takes the MCAT for fun. So they know that already. So what is it that you learned about yourself that's something that they can work with? So even if it's a weakness, it's good for them to know your weaknesses because then they know what they can help build. But if it's something that they already know from just basic, like your application, they got nothing from this answer. So feel free to like unpack a little bit and share other things about yourself that aren't really obvious from your application. This essay is only for applicants who have already received their degree, so this is your gap year. Please clarify for the admissions committee your activities since receiving your degree. You may list them in chronological order, or you can incorporate them into an essay. So this is a very limited number of characters. Most people just write a quick blurb. If you just graduated, you would just say, I recently got a job at the blah, 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 doing whatever. If you've been out of school for many years, which I doubt anyone here is in that situation, and it's really long, then you would list it out almost like in a literal list. But my guess is that most of you will have recently graduated by the time you applied. And so you would just maybe even indicate what you plan to do for the next year because you haven't graduated yet, so you haven't been out too long. Unless there are any alum here. But that's how I would handle that. It's not, you don't have to reflect on it. You don't need to, write anything. You just literally tell them what you've been up to. Just a little tidbit about that. Gap year questions. Most schools, or at least what I've heard over the years, I've heard that most schools like to know that once you've graduated college, aside from studying for a test, that you've been busy for about 40 hours a week. So the assumption is that once you graduate college, you're going to go out and get a job. Even if it's working as a barista at a coffee shop, you still should be working. If you have a college degree, you should be getting paid, right? I mean, you are a college educated person, so on some level you should be busy. And you don't have to work one job for 40 hours a week. You could work 2 part-time jobs or 3 part-time jobs, but they expect you to be busy after you graduate. And so it's okay if you're taking some time off to apply or you're taking a couple months off to take the test. But after that, you really do need to show that you have accounted for 40 hours a week. And some schools will literally ask you to account for 40 hours a week. They will say, show us what you're doing up to 40 hours a week. So that's just something to think about. If you were thinking in your head, oh, I'm just going to take the fall off and spend time with family and, chillax, probably not a good idea. You really need to be doing something. All right, UC Davis.
Joanne, could I ask a
Yeah,
quick question from the last slide?
yeah, of course.
So, for the last slide, I believe it said, in the last prompt, it said state why you chose a particular activity. So would you just state whatever you did and then give like a brief one sentence description
Oh yeah.
on like
Oh good. Thanks for catching that. I
yeah.
literally just read an Irvine one earlier today and they didn't do that. They had a lot
Oh,
though. They had like a whole list of things, so there was no room to do that. So if you
okay.
have room, I would say yes, do that. You can
Okay.
say, I guess, why I'm guessing for a lot of these activities, it's going to be pretty similar. But yeah, I would say reflect on why you did it. If you
Okay.
just received or will receive degree. Okay, yeah, what are you going to do? Yeah, good.
Okay. And another question is if this thing says 1500 characters at the top, so is it all three prompts have to have a character count of 1500 or
No,
is that a
each one gets 1500.
oh gotcha. Okay. Okay.
Yep,
Thank you.
which is not a lot.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a lot. Okay, so UC Davis. Anybody here from Northern California? You don't have to raise your hand. But if you are, so here's a couple things that I've heard over the years about UCs. So I know for a fact, because I worked at UC Davis for 6 years, that UC Davis it does give preference to people from Northern California. So if you have a Northern California zip code, they screen Northern California folks differently than they screen Southern California people. It's not that Southern California people aren't getting screened or terribly disadvantaged. It's just they are looking for people who want to stay in the area and serve the Central Valley and Sacramento. And that makes sense, right? The same reason that UCR asks you about the Inland Empire, UC Davis is doing the same thing. So people in Northern California might have a harder time getting into UCR or UCI. It goes both ways. So if you are from Northern California and you have a preference to go to UC Davis, it would be to your advantage in your application to list your parents' address with your Northern California zip code. And so let's go through these prompts. Discuss any elements in your app that you feel might be concerning to the committee. I feel very strongly about this answer. I think that this is one of those just because you can doesn't mean you should answers. So for a lot of people, they're very concerned about things that in my opinion, they don't need to be concerned about. So for example, let's say you have some B minuses in your application. That is not something you should be concerned about. Now, if you go on and on in this essay for 500 characters, which is not really long enough to go on and on about, but let's say you do, about your B minus that you got. That actually says more about you in a negative way than it does addressing your B minus. That's actually more problematic. Your B minus was never a problem, but now you've raised a red flag about yourself. Let's say you have a single C minus, or C, you'd have to repeat it if you had a C minus. Let's say you have a single C on your entire application and it's an OChem. Do you think that the admissions committee is concerned about your single C in OChem? I promise you they're not. With all of my heart, I promise you that they are not concerned about your C in OChem. Now, let's say you have straight C's across any series. Let's say you have straight C's across biochem, physics, or OChem. Then what they're going to do if they see that is they're going to look at your MCAT and say, did you master this content at any point? If your MCAT score indicates that you were okay in that area, then there won't be any concern about it because the MCAT is supposed to be, the great equalizer, right? That if you know the content, you're supposed to be able to demonstrate it on the test. Now, that's not my personal opinion. That's what they believe. So if you have major obstacles in your grades, like let's say your first couple of years of college are pretty rocky, you had a lot of C's, let's say you have worse than C's, that is where you want to sort of talk about what happened. And I would just give them some context and background, just address it very directly. Don't be defensive, you just need to state what happened. If your MCAT score is very low, this is where you can simply explain why you think it was. If you have a low CARS score, you can try to, I don't know what you could possibly say. You could say, I have a low CARS score, it was a hard test. You could say that if English wasn't your first language, they'll know that already because they will have already read your biographic information section. But it's hard to explain away an MCAT. I don't know. If anybody has any ideas of what you could say, I'd love to hear it. But generally speaking, I would say don't get super defensive in this section. If it's something you want to point out, just say it very matter-of-factly with a straight tone. Because the more you fret about it, the more it seems like you're concerned about it. And at this point, if you've chosen to apply to medical school, you really shouldn't have any concerns, right? Like, if you say, I am good enough right now to apply, I am good enough to be a doctor right now, you school should not be concerned about me. But if you are super concerned about yourself, then they're going to say, well, if you're so concerned about yourself, maybe we should be concerned about you. Does that make sense? So this is why I say this is one of those just because you can doesn't mean you should. You can talk about your problems, but I don't know if you should. I think at this point, if they've gotten this far in your application, they've already forgiven your grades. They've already forgiven any hiccups that you have, because if they didn't like your grades or your MCAT, they wouldn't have read any further. They would have just stopped. If they've already read all of your experiences, all of your personal statement, now they're reading the secondaries, there's a good chance that, they've already looked past that. Now, I will say with UC Davis, there is some degree of screening that happens. There's multiple screens, and different people read different parts of your app. So somebody who's reading your secondary might not actually read your primary application. And so, again, this person won't have any idea about your grades. They won't know what your GPA or your MCAT score is. So if you are wanting them to just believe that you're ready to go to med school, then you can say, I had some hiccups in the beginning of my college career. As you can see, I have an upward trend going. I figured out how to study. I got much better, and just leave it at that. That's all they'll know about you. Okay, moving on. Do you have a connection to Northern or Central California? This is where you will very simply say, yes, all of you will have a connection to Northern California somehow, some way. If you have ever been to Northern California, you will talk about what you understand about Northern California. You will maybe draw parallels to what you understand about Sacramento compared to a region that you've lived in. Maybe you know the communities that they're serving. So you could look up the 9 student-run clinics that UC Davis has and look at some of the communities that they serve and talk about wanting to work at one of those student-run clinics. If you are from Northern California, then you will state, my family is from Northern California, state the city. My family lives in Roseville. Everybody I know is there. Even though I went away for 4 years for college, I was born and raised. I am very familiar with the community, and my intention is to return to Northern California and serve the community there. So if you're from Northern California, I highly recommend stating that you intend to stay there. If you're not, then you have to make the case that you understand it enough to be effective while you're there, and that you like it, right? Like, there's something about Northern California that you like. Maybe you like skiing. Maybe you like being close to San Francisco. Maybe you like, cooler weather. I don't know. But you got to make that case. So please list the activities you would like to be considered. Okay, this one makes everybody very frustrated. They're making you list your top 3 meaningful experiences. They're cutting it down to 500 characters, and you're basically just saying, how did it prepare you for a medical career? So you can copy and paste your information from AMCAS directly in here. You're going to have to change it anyway because of the taking it from 700 characters to 500, but you don't have to stress about completely rewriting new information because your experiences are the same. Like, you can't make up new things that you did. So just copy and paste it, and then just change it up a little bit, take out the most irrelevant details, and leave what's left for 500. Any questions about UC Davis? I happen to know a little bit about this school, so if you have any questions about Davis in general, I could answer maybe. I can't see. Let's see. Can I say my brother goes to Chico? Well, I would say if you've been in the area, just talk about how you have, like, what you have seen. Like, what have you noticed in the communities? Like, I guess I would say not just seen, but like, how do you understand Northern California in terms of how you can serve it, how you can contribute something? Okay, no questions? Alrighty. UCSF. It's always funny to me because everyone tells me they're not applying to UCSF because of some assumption they have about UCSF, but Like I've had students in the past who've gotten into UCSF with no research experience, with varied MCAT and GPAs. And so I would encourage you that if you're thinking about UCSF and you're just thinking, oh, I'm just not competitive enough, why don't you let them make that decision? Especially if you got fee assistance, let them make that decision. You might be surprised. UCSF has a very social justice lens, and they very much are looking for the same things that all the UCs are looking for. Even though they have a lot of research coming out of UCSF, they are still very much interested in the same type of applicant that most of the UCs are. So I would approach UCSF with the exact same approach as every other school. Try not to think about it as being one of the most competitive schools in the country. Try not to think about it that way. If you want to go there, if you really don't mind living in San Francisco, I think that's probably the biggest thing for me is like, do you really want to live in San Francisco? For a lot of people, the answer is no. And if you really don't want to live in a city like that, then you just don't apply there. That'd be the reason you don't apply. You don't apply because you don't think you can get in. You just don't apply because you don't really want to go there. That's fair. All right, if you wish to update or expand upon your activities, you may provide additional information below. So what is that? Why would they ask you that? Well, a lot of times people just want to talk more about themselves. They want to just say more of what they did. I really would encourage you not to expand on all 15 of your experiences. That would be, and the funny thing about this is I believe it's unlimited, or it's like, it's large enough where you could literally write another probably 4 or 5 pages. Don't do that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I want you all to write that down and repeat that to yourself over and over and over. So, if you wish to update your activities or expand upon, pick and choose which ones have you not got to adequately, I guess, reveal how that experience brings value to UCSF. So your job is always to convince schools how you're a good fit for them. So think about what you've done that most closely aligns with UCSF, maybe serving similar communities or working in an urban area. And then you might expand upon how your activities have prepared you for a medical education in San Francisco. That would be how I would use this. Again, do not regurgitate everything you just said on your experiences page. That would be failure to restrain yourself, like failure to not do what they're giving you the opportunity to do. Some people just cannot help themselves, and they just have to keep telling people the same thing over and over and over because they think it's so important for them to know how important these experiences were. If you do things like that, you say to the med school, like, I think what I did was really, really important, and I just want you to know that. But it doesn't tell them why you should go there. It doesn't tell them why they should pick you. You doing really important things in college is not why they should pick you. Why they should pick you is because of the value that you bring to them. And the value you bring is not the experiences you did. The value you bring is the insight, the knowledge, the perspective, those things that you can contribute to helping them in some way. That's what you want to highlight. And so if you want to expand upon your activities, make sure you're doing so with reflection. All right, if you're a 19 or earlier graduate, use the space to tell us what you've done. So once you write a really good kind of gap year answer, you can copy and paste it into all of these. You don't need to sit and rewrite all of these from scratch. You're just going to adapt them to the character counts. Any questions about UCSF? Okay. All right, now UCSD, the beloved autobiographical sketch. The number one question I get about this is, what is this? What am I supposed to be doing here? So, an autobiography is your story. It's your life story. And you want to think about, how did you come about being as a person? And I think the biggest mistake people make is they start with college. They say, well, I majored in this and I went to this school. And this might come to a shock to you, but you did not form as a human being from college, right? You came to be as a human being from your family, your childhood, where you grew up, whether you were raised in a urban or a rural environment, whether you lived in a sprawling suburban home or you lived in a crowded apartment with 6 people. Who you are depends on whether you were the first child or the last child or even the middle child, Whether you spoke English in your home or whether you learned English later, if you were born and raised in the US or you came later in life, and how much later in life has a big impact on your worldview. If you immigrated to America at age 19, you're going to see things very differently than someone who was brought here at age 5. And so, just all of those things, how do you see the world? If you were undocumented, I would highly recommend highlighting that and talking about how that impacted your family and how it impacted you even today. If you, let's see, if you were ever uninsured in your life, talking about that. So there are lots of things that I'm sure you could share about yourself. But let's say, and so all of that, you're going to share, kind of tell a story. I don't want you just to list random facts. I want you to put this into a narrative form where you're painting a picture of your life. And eventually it's going to lead to the present tense. So what did you do throughout your childhood? Were you an artist? Did you play sports? Did you learn any instruments? Maybe you didn't. Maybe you had to stay home and take care of your siblings. Maybe you started working at a young age. Whatever it is, just how did your childhood develop? And then as you get into adolescence, what were your things in high school? Like what were you all about? Were you a Girl Scout? Were you did you do drama? Were you in the newspaper? And then as you get into college, what was your thing? You know, like don't list everything you did, but what were the couple big things that defined you? And then move to present tense and how that all of that synthesize all of that stuff about you. How does that make you not only want to be a doctor, but want to get your medical education in San Diego? So think about who they are and try to tie who you are with who they are. And if you can explicitly state the value that you bring to them, that's even better. I call that a power statement. So if you can tell a school why they should pick you based on who you are, that's really powerful. Any questions?
Oh, Joanne, one question.
Yeah.
Does San Diego have like a regional thing as well, or?
I don't know because I mean I was in Northern California for 6 years. You guys know that.
Mm,
I had a bunch of people from Davis get into San Diego, so I'm not sure that they do.
got it. Okay.
I think what I've always told my applicants about San Diego is they are competitive, but don't again like don't let it get in your head. Don't convince yourself that you're not good enough. Think about what it is that they're doing down there. Find a couple of really cool things that they're doing that makes you want to go there. And then when you're writing this, let that come out naturally. Let your enthusiasm and your excitement about what they're doing come out. And you're trying to convince them that again that you really want to be there and that you can do something once you get there. They have plenty of applicants who are smart enough. They have plenty of people who really want to go to San Diego, right? Like everyone wants to stay in California because they want to be close to family. People want to live in San Diego because it's beautiful. Like they can pick anyone they want. So it's not just wanting to be there. Wanting to be there is not enough. And that's true for all the UCs. If all you're focusing on is how bad you want to be there, you're going to lose. Like it's not going to work out. You need to move beyond why you want to be there and you want to tell them what you can do for them. They're picking you, right? So you want to make sure you're highlighting how who you are as a human being aligns with what they're doing and how you can actually be helpful to them in some way. And yeah, I mean, why you want to be there is important, but please, please, please don't ever mention things like, I want to stay close to family or San Diego is beautiful. Like they already know those things, right? That's not really helpful information. Because it's so long, it's longer than your personal statement. This is something you want to spend some time on. Don't write draft, don't send them first or second draft writing. Start writing this early and then get lots and lots of eyes on it and get some help with it because if you're serious about San Diego, you want to send your best work to them. You're not going to spend 6 months on it like you did your personal statement, but you definitely want to give it a couple of read throughs, at least. All right. Okay, so UCLA. You can apply to both Geffen and Charles Drew at UCLA, and I would say probably, I don't know how many people honestly apply to both. So Charles Drew is this school that is more geared towards underserved and underrepresented students, although anyone can apply there. And then Geffen is just the regular school, and they're both good school. I mean, they're both perfectly that you are in the exact same classes. It's the exact same education, so there isn't any difference in the two tracks that you're on, but there are two applications. So for UCLA, they basically ask you to elaborate on all of your experiences. And what this is a little bit different than your meaningful, because they're asking you to talk about like one important non-academic activity in your life. So I would say something completely away from school. Like, don't talk about research. Talk about something else that's just for you. So maybe a non-academic activity might be art or playing an instrument or athletics, something that's just for you. And then what has been one unique leadership or entrepreneurial creative activity? That's pretty broad. So again, like if you didn't talk about art in your first one, a creative activity could be art. But the key word here is unique, right? If you are going to talk about something like leadership, I would encourage you not to just talk about something that you think 90% of the applicants could talk about. So this is really just trying to highlight the best of your experiences. So unique, entrepreneurial, and then look at the next word, the most important volunteer work, and why was it meaningful? So important is relative. Important to who, right? Important to you or important to community? I would say you can use you can take that however you want, but the fact that they chose to use the word important would make me think about how you're portraying that. So if you are gonna, whatever volunteer work you choose, maybe you address why it was important and to whom. If it's important to you, then give them the historical context as to why. Has there been or will be any gap between achieving your degree and the expected time of medical school? So this is your gap year. Yes, just explain it. If the answer is no, then you say no. What is the most important honor you have received, and why do you view this as important? So honors means a lot of things. It could be something personal to you, like maybe you were given some award through one of your other activities. It could be something formal like that, like you actually got an award, or it could be symbolic honor, meaning you had the honor of taking care of it, like someone gave you a big responsibility to take care of, and that was an honor to be given that responsibility. Maybe it was an honor to care for someone who you loved a lot in your life, if you had a high degree of responsibility. So you can do whatever you want with that word honor, but obviously you get to think about that. Whatever you do, whatever story you choose to tell with 300 characters, which is not a story, by the way, it's just stating it, you get to reveal something that matters to you. And then what has been your most scholarly project? Again, 300 characters, which is just a sentence or two. It could be if you did any research, or it could be like a paper you wrote. If you wrote a paper in a class that was really important to you because it, delved into a concept you care a lot about, you could talk about that. And then you can see it asked for like the number of hours, dates, and if you had an advisor. So if it wasn't a formal experience that you had listed in your application, if you're going to talk about something else, then you would just talk about like estimated number of hours that you did. Any questions about UCLA?
Joanne, can I ask one?
Yes, please.
So do Drew and Geffen have different application questions, or is it the same questions for each one?
So I was digging through all of my past essays from people, and I couldn't find different ones.
Got it. Okay.
I could only like this. These are the ones that came up for the people who labeled it Charles Drew, and these are the ones that came up for the people who labeled it Geffen. So it could be I could be wrong, and this could be different this year. But this is what I had found from last year.
Got it. So like theoretically, you could like copy and paste for your
Yes.
answers. Okay, got it.
You're going to copy and paste a lot of things for different answers across all schools.
Yeah.
Make sure, as you guys are doing that work, make sure you're checking school names. You want to try to use the school name as much as you can. Just be really, really careful you're not accidentally using the wrong school name at different schools. I don't know if you'd be surprised to know that that happens a lot. You might think, oh, I would never do that. That would never happen to me. I'm careful. But, a lot of people have done that. And so it's very possible, especially when you get rushing because you're wanting to get them in fast and you're stressed out. When you're stressed out, people make mistakes. So the best thing is to do things calmly, slowly, deliberately. Don't get in a frenzy. Don't start, rushing to get it all done. When you're rushing, you're going to mess up. Oh, I messed up. UCLA goes on and on. Okay, I forgot. UCLA is like a 6-pager in terms of, it feels like it. It goes on and on. Describe a problem in your life, how you dealt with it, how it influenced your growth. So a problem in your life could be anything. I would think about, so there are people who have, there's a spectrum of problems, right? Like some people might say the biggest problem I've had in my life is my alcoholic father. Some people might say the biggest problem I've had in my life is, I don't know, my computer died last week. Some people have more or less problems than others. Wherever you land in terms of describing your problem is going to indicate to them how bad or great your life has been. So if you've had a really, questionable, if you've had a lot of problems in your life, I'm trying to find a nice way to say that. If you've had a lot of problems in your life and then you choose to talk about wearing the wrong shoes one day at an event, that's going to make it seem like your life didn't really have any problems, right? So choose a problem that if you've had a lot of problems, then choose one and be honest about it and talk about it. There's nothing wrong with sharing things that have gone on in your life. Like a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't want to talk bad about my parents," or "I don't want to share that. That's too personal," or "I don't want them to think bad things about me." Wouldn't that be a red flag if I talked about like my eating disorder or my own mental health? I've heard all this. No and no and no, no to all of it. It's very common for people to talk about these things. If you're not comfortable talking about it, that's fine. That's you, that's on you. But people do. People definitely talk about all kinds of things. And if it was a real problem, I would just ask, like, why would you not want to share if it actually caused you some problems? So, it's totally, I'm not pressuring you to talk about something you're not ready to talk about. But if you can talk about it, it gives them a lot more insight into who you are and what you've overcome than picking a sort of, I don't want to say like simpler problem, but if you've had bigger problems, it shares more about you. Please list any major work experience during or since college. So if you had to work during college, this is where you want to talk about that. You might even mention why you had to work. Most people don't work because they love working. But if let's say you just had a research position or you had a tutoring job in college and you got paid, you weren't working because you had to, you were just working because you wanted to, you wanted the experience. There's nothing wrong with that either. You would still list that as having worked during college. But if you had to work in college to support yourself, that's where I would indicate that. It'll all line up because they'll be able to see your contributions, they'll be able to see your parents' income. Even people who come from parents who supported them, they still sometimes work because they say, well, I didn't want to rely on my parents for everything, so I wanted to have extra spending money, I wanted to pay for my own books, whatever it is. Basically, they want to know that you worked, though. Where do you see yourself post-graduation? What do you want to do when you grow up? And then what have you done that have led you to this goal? So this is the same question that we talked about the first one. What do you want to do? Again, why would they ask you that if you're not supposed to know? You should at least think about it, right? You could say, maybe you don't know you don't know what field of medicine you want to go into, but maybe you know that you want to work with children. So you could say, well, I don't know exactly what specialty I'll be in, but I have a feeling it's going to be with children. And the reason why is because when I did X, Y, and Z, I feel very drawn to them, or something like that, some reason. So if you know that you want to work in a public health, in some way around public health or community health, if you know that you're going to be a research scientist in some way, or a physician researcher, then you can talk about that. You might not know exactly what you're going to study, but you can definitely bring all that stuff in. Okay.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
What happens if we don't work? Do we basically don't have anything to write on, or
So like as in you've never had a job?
Well, not something major as in like a paid job. Most of them are just volunteer or
Have
um
you,
academic credit. So
have you
not
ever worked ever? Like you've never had a paid job?
no, well, it's kind of hard for me because I in immigrant moved in like around high school, so I'm not really used to working. So I don't really I'm trying to think. I don't think I have like a major paid work. So that's why I was like, okay, that's not good.
Well, I mean, they gave you, look at the other characters on the other ones, and then they gave you 4,000 characters for work experience. So to
Mhm.
me, that says that UCLA is expecting that you have worked.
I see. Okay, so if this is the case, then I should put it in my lower priorities and yeah. Okay.
I would maybe say where you plan to work. So you could just say, maybe explain why you didn't work. Maybe culturally it's not appropriate. It wasn't appropriate for you to get a job. Maybe your parents insisted that you not work, things like that. But then I would quickly say that you intend to get a job this next year and you plan to work because you understand the value of work experience. Working is very different than volunteering because volunteering, they're like thankful to you for volunteering. When you work, you are accountable, right? You have to show up on time, you have to answer to people, you have unhappy customers, you're going to have a bad boss who's going to yell at you, you're going to have coworkers who are going to be terrible. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of things that are going to come up through work experience that are going to help you move forward and grow up as a person. And they know that. Everybody knows that. So, a lot of schools really like work experience. And so if you have never had a job, my personal advice to you is to go get a job. Any job, even if you work as a barista, just get a job just because that's really good experience for you as a person to have that accountability. I used to speak in front of 500 parents, people who were going into college during like decision day, and the parents would all be asking me, "What should I do to prepare my kid?" and da da da. And I would tell every single parent in that room, 500 parents, I said, "The number one thing you need to make your kids do is go get a job." And they would look at me like they'd gasp, like, "Oh, my kid, they can't get a job." No, they really need to go get a job, any job. I don't care what it is. Because working is going to move you forward. And if you've had jobs, you might know what I'm talking about. If you haven't had a job, I don't want you to panic and feel bad or anything. I just want you to think about it. I want you to go try to get a job. I think, like I said, even if you work 5-10 hours a week on campus, anything you do is going to help you take a step forward in just developing as a person. Because there's just nothing like having a terrible boss, is there, for those who've had bad bosses. You really can't grow in any other way from having that bad boss and overcoming that obstacle, realizing how to communicate and how to problem solve and yeah, all of that. It's not fun when you're going through it, but when you look back, you're like, oh yes, that was good for me. Okay, I threw USC in here just for funsies because it's not a UC, but close enough. Most of the California applicants I've worked with apply to USC. I didn't put Stanford because most of the people I've seen don't apply to Stanford. I also didn't put Loma Linda because most of the people I work with don't apply to Loma Linda. But almost everybody applies to USC. So these are the fun questions that they have. What is the most fun you've had lately? If you had to give yourself a nickname, what would it be? If you had enormous wealth, how would you allocate your money? And what does health equity mean to you? So what do we know about USC? Well, USC, the students train in the LA County Hospital, which is about 80% Spanish speaking and predominantly low income. And we know that a lot of people who go to USC, I can make an assumption that a lot of them come from pretty privileged backgrounds. So they kind of know that a lot of their own students come from that background, but the medical school serves a very underserved community. So I imagine if I'm USC and I'm thinking, okay, how do I balance this, right? How do I balance knowing that a lot of people want to come here who are privileged, and at the same time, we need people who are going to be able to serve our community? So what do we ask to get to that information? Well, what is the most fun you've had lately? Why would they ask that? Well, they might want to know, do you know how to relax? Are you someone who can find balance and who can do things that aren't work? Because really high-strung people who are very uber successful sometimes don't know how to have fun. I've asked this question to, and I'm like, so what's the most fun you've had? And they say, well, the most fun I had is my research lab. I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. That's not what we're asking. How have you had fun? And they're like, I have fun at research. And I'm like, okay, you don't understand. So if going to your research lab is literally the most fun you have, then you need to take a step back and think about, like, what are they looking for here? They are looking for you to be able to not work. If you had to give yourself a nickname, what would it be? I would talk about something that's meaningful to you, that shares something else about you. I wouldn't use your literal real nickname. I would come up with something that just gives you a chance to talk about yourself in some other way. So sometimes people have talked about like some hobby that they have or some interest that they have, something about, social justice, something they care a lot about, and they come up with a creative nickname about that. And then if you had enormous wealth, so I would be very specific. I would say if you have two really strong interests in life, you might say, I'm going to give 50% of my money to this very specific organization that addresses LGBTQ health, and the other half I'm going to give to this organization that works with foster youth. So pick two things that mean a lot to you, and then talk about why that means so much to you. Now you only get 3 to 5 sentences to do this, so the faster you are at telling them where your money is going, then the more time you have to kind of unpack why that is. And then the last question is really getting at the heart of what I said. What does health equity mean to you? This is going to help them kind of separate people in terms of understanding people's appreciation for the need for health equity. If you don't know what health equity is, I would Google it, read about it, interpret it, synthesize it, spit it back out as an answer that has something to do with you. So do not just give them a textbook definition. Think about it in the context of what you've seen in your life or your experiences, and show them that you understand the need for it. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and answer any questions that you have about any of the secondaries that I shared today. Okay, I'm going to stop recording then.